In this episode, we're swapping stories for sorties, showcasing how the blue and gold are rooted right next to our homegrown bluebonnets and yellow roses.
Your United States Navy Flight Demonstration Squadron takes pleasure in performing for you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Blue Angels.
I'm Lieutenant Commander James Haley. I'm the number 2 pilot and right wingman for the 2021 Blue Angels.
Perfect. TV show, what this is, it's Lone Star Stories. And our goal is to figure out why Texas has the stereotype of being bigger and better.
Howdy, I'm Major Frank Zascaville, call sign Chomps. I'm number 3, the left wingman, F-18 demonstration pilot for the United States Navy Blue Angels 2020 show season.
Hi, I'm Ryan Notoff. My grandfather was Bush Forrest, the first leader of the Blue Angels back in 1946, and I currently produce a YouTube channel called Blue Angel Phantoms, where I feature the history of the Blue Angels through the words of the pilots that have served on the team.
Texas really helped shape me and mold me into to have the motivation to join the military.
I follow the mantra, I wasn't born there, but I literally got there as fast as I could.
Really lives up to my expectations of Texas.
Texas.
Texas really fit the bill for us. We were really looking for a sense of community and a sense of family, and my brother and his family moved out here, and my parents moved out here before I did. So it just made natural sense for us to move out to Austin, Texas. So my wife moved our kids before I moved out here, and then I turned in the keys to our house, and I drove 3 days across the United States to get to Austin, Texas, and that was my first time actually seeing Austin, Texas, was driving up for the first time. So I wouldn't really recommend that for people who are looking to move, but it worked out. Austin has been a great city for us. We've really found a good sense of community there. And my biggest fear was I had the dream job of my life for a great company, and giving that up, and so I was a little fearful of that, but I was able to immediately find a job and everything. My kids are thriving in school, and really the sense of community in Austin is incredible. I know all my neighbors. You can't really walk to the mailbox without having a 10-minute conversation with someone or being invited in for a beer in someone's garage. So Texas has been great, and I don't regret my move at all. Who my grandfather is? My grandfather was Bush Forrest. He was the first leader of the Blue Angels back in 1946, and he was actually a World War II ace before that. He had 8 confirmed enemy shoot-downs, and later on, after the Korean War, he was actually invited back to lead the Blue Angels one more time when they transitioned to jets.
I guess we've been on the road not more than about a month, maybe something like that, when we said we've got to come up with a name here and come up with it shortly. And so we ran a contest in the training command, which encompasses a number of bases and quite a big population, and with a monetary payment and the pride of having come up with a name. And boy, the names started coming in, and Sky Dancers, Navy Blue Lancers, but we didn't get a name that we liked. I remember sitting in the room there with my number 2 man, Morris Wickendall, and he was going through the New Yorker magazine, goings on about town in the front part of it, and it lists the night spots and entertainment and the dining spots, and he says, "Boss, I've got it. And I said, "What is it?" It's Blue Angels. He says, "Here's a Blue Angel nightclub." And it was absolutely, hands down, that's it. I was a fresh-caught lieutenant commander, and I was 25 years old. I was selected. I was a bachelor and had done acrobatic flying. It was kind of one of the things I enjoyed doing. Being a fighter pilot, you better be comfortable upside down, right side up, low to the ground, high to the ground. What do you have for qualifications? I fit in the airplane, knew how to fly, and Was able to devote 100% of my time to it since I didn't have to go home and take kiddies to the doctor and do things like that. So also established, and I did this, established the requirement that everybody on the team be a bachelor. So we had all be in stepping and marching to the same tune. So the Navy, in the Secretary of the Navy's office, and of course in concert with the Chief of Naval Operations, decided that we will form a Navy flight exhibition team. We were formed in the training command purposely to provide an incentive for the young cadets coming up through to say, here's what you will eventually be doing this type of flying. The idea was bring fighter aviation down, since we were fighters, that normally takes place well up in the sky and not in close view of the average public, general public, bring it down to where they can see it. Unfortunately, I had served, with a lot of wonderful pilots, and I was able to pick my people. And that made it easier, because we were under almost emergency orders to get this thing in the air. The instructions that I got, and are the kind you like if you're assigned to do something, is go do it, tell me when you've done it and you're ready. And of course, Washington realized it was sensitive, and they also knew that we could be in the headlines tomorrow if we had a bad accident or something went wrong. And we started with 3 planes. That's because of the big propellers. You get a 4th plane in that slot with that big meat eater back there, and it's a little hard to manage and do what I thought we wanted to do.
This is the first group right here, right? These are you with the first group of guys?
That goes back. That was our first year, and that was our first trophy that we had won.
And these were the planes you flew?
Yeah, that's over Miami, or that was on Miami, and that's the first Blue Angel airplane.
And you're here in one of these planes, which, by the way, was the first leader.
We're taxiing in there at the National Air Races in Cleveland.
Everybody now thinks, of course, in terms
upside down. That's getting a little sloppy.
We could all tell, but we didn't want to say anything.
I was always right. The rest were.
Now, we always think of the Blue Angels now, of course, screaming over the bay for fleet weeks, and they're in jets. But you began with prop planes.
Yeah.
What were these planes that you
were flying? These are the Navy's basic fighter, the F-6F Hellcat, and the Bearcat, and then into jets. Well, we wanted to show off naval aviation to those that normally don't see it, and to attempt to get the right impression in the youth of America in naval aviation, and to build the naval air strength.
Did you ever get to fly one of the jets? I mean, actually sit behind the controls of one of the jets when they moved on to the jets?
Oh, I was the 5th leader also. I went back as a leader in jets. So I started them, and then in props, and then went back in jets.
In 1950, the Blues were disbanded and reorganized to make up the nucleus of Satan's Kittens, the F-191, to go fight in the Korean War. Unfortunately, their leader at the time, a guy named Johnny Magda, was shot down. So when they brought the Blue Angels back and reorganized them as the Blue Angels after the war, they actually called Bush Morrison, the grandfather, to lead the team.
I was called back to lead the team again in jets. And remember, it was Admiral Bringle saying, Butch, you didn't. We're working on the formation of the team, and we think you should do it for us. Do it again. And I shook hands with Admiral Bringle and said, I'll do it, sir.
Things had changed for Butch at that point. He was now married, and one of the requirements when the Blue Angels first started is that he had to be a bachelor. So Butch was not sure how my grandmother Thea was actually going to receive him being selected as the leader of the Blue Angels. So he actually had to develop a scenario in which they could kind of trick her into accepting the fact that he was going to go take this somewhat dangerous job. He hadn't been flying. He had actually had a desk job at the time. They had a cocktail party at his house, and the Admiral came over and said, acted like they had never talked about this before, and said, oh, Butch, we're going to start up the Blue Angels. We'd really like you to come back and lead the Blue Angels. And Butch was like, no, I've had my time, and you should find someone else. And my grandmother turned to him and said, what are you, chicken? And so we found out it was cool with her, and that's how he became the next leader of the Blue Angels in 1952.
This is my family. You get older, you say, this is the family that I started anyway, and yeah, it's there. I guess it's just a normal feeling. I'm so proud of them.
So growing up with my grandfather was amazing. First of all, I get to go to a lot of Blue Angel air shows, of course, and I can remember my first air show was at Moffett Field in 1987, and what a treat. So we get to the air show, and right on the flight line is this big C-130 all painted up, and it was Fat Albert. So my grandfather takes me over and my family, and we get to meet all the pilots of Fat Albert and get to meet the crew of the Blue Angels. Well, next thing you know, as a 5-year-old, I'm actually sitting at the controls of Pat Albert, which is a dream. I mean, being 38 years old now, I wish I could do that today. So later on that air show, we watched the Blue Angels. They just transitioned to the F-18 Hornet, and after the air show, I got to meet the pilots. I got to meet Gil Rude, Donnie Cochran, Wayne Molnar, Dave Anderson, and so those guys were my heroes. So that was like a typical trip to an air show with Butch. You got access that other people didn't. So I'm keenly aware of that now. I'm grateful, but that actually came full circle this year. In 2021, as you know, the Blue Angels just transitioned to the F-18 Super Hornet, and so they retired all their legacy Hornets. So those legacy Hornets have made their way around to different museums around the country. Well, one ended up at the Frontiers of Flight Museum in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. And to commemorate it, they put the name of Pat Walsh on the side of the cockpit, who was actually the slot pilot for that 1987 season. Well, to celebrate the new F-18 Hornet coming to the museum, they invited the 1987 team to actually come participate in a panel discussion, and the D.F.W. Tailhook Association called me and invited me to put together a panel discussion and facilitate it. So it came full circle this year, and it was pretty incredible to think that I met those pilots when I was 5 years old at my first air show, and there I was on stage sitting next to Pat Walsh and Wayne Molnar, and had the rest of the guys in a Zoom call getting to interview them. So gave me goosebumps and great appreciation, and that wouldn't have happened. You know, I'm keenly aware that happened because I'm Butch Morris's grandson. So Butch was asked to start the Blue Angels because World War II had just come to a conclusion, and the Navy wasn't really in the public eye as much as they were before. So the Chief of Naval Operations, Chester Nimitz, decided that he wanted to start a flight exhibition team using Navy assets. So he commissioned this order. Butch Morris was in the right place at the right time. He was a flight instructor in Jacksonville, and he was asked what his thoughts would be to put together a team. So he was asked to do a write-up. So he spent a weekend writing up the planes he'd picked, the pilots he'd picked, the maintenance required, etc. Well, after he turned in his assessment, they said, all right, great, go ahead. You're the boss, go put it together. So Butch picked his pilots, he picked his planes, he picked the Hellcat because he was familiar with it because he used it in World War II. He picked pilots he flew with in World War II. And they went to work out of the swamps of Jacksonville. And Butch would always say, you know, he thought they were asked to train over these swamps because if they had any mishaps that they would crash and the alligators would be there to eat the evidence and no one would ever know. So it's pretty top secret in the beginning, but after 2 or 3 months, they got what they thought was a good demo together, and they got approval from the brass and the Navy, and they had their first air show in June of 1946 at Craig Field in Jacksonville. And it was at the Southeast Air Expo. And so they did a weekend of air shows, and at the end of the air show, that team, that very first Blue Angels team, received a trophy for the best aerial performance for that weekend. And that trophy now, today, sits in the briefing room of the Blue Angels. What was Butch's career like before becoming a Blue Angel? Butch was really busy. So he grew up, so Butch was born in 1919 in East Los Angeles, and he had a huge passion for aviation because he lived 15 miles away from an airport called Alhambra Airport. So he used to go out there and watch airplanes land, and that's really what sparked his interest in aviation. He eventually moved up to a small town called Aptos, California in the Monterey Bay, and he got more into sports and school, so he ended up graduating from Salinas Junior College. And he actually was really interested in the medical field. His first job was as an apprentice to a mortician, of all things. A lot of people don't know that about him. So I think if Butch didn't join the Navy, he probably would have ended up being a doctor. He always had an interest in medicine. But one day he's walking by a post office in 1941, and he saw a poster, or it's actually 1939, but he saw a poster that said Fly Navy, and that was it. He signed up, and 6 months later, he's in Corpus Christi, and he's assigned to a dive bomber squadron after he learned to fly, which he actually didn't want to be a dive bomber, but in the Navy you take your orders and you go with it. But as the war escalated and he was transferred out to the Pacific Fleet in San Diego, California, there was a call out to see if anyone wanted to transition from dive bombers to fighter pilots. And he said that single day changed the course of his career and one of the biggest milestones in his career, because he switched from being a bomber to a fighter. And as a result, he was able to go off to World War II. He flew the F-4F Wildcat in his first deployment aboard the USS Enterprise. And in his first combat engagement, he was actually shot down. So he went out to defend Guadalcanal, 3 Navy pilots versus dozens of Japanese pilots. And so he was immediately able to shoot down 1 pilot, but right after that, he had some bullets go right through his cockpit, and he had to actually crash land on the island of Guadalcanal. He'd taken a shrapnel wound in his arm, and took several days to recover. And from there, after he recovered, it was all business. came back to the fleet, and he was actually assigned to what was called the Bat Team. This was a special experimental unit that was made to do some night flights and defend some of the United States assets that were being bombed at night by the Japanese. So that team was actually started by a gentleman named Edward Butch O'Hare, who was the first naval ace in World War II. Well, the Bat Team only lasted 3 missions. So Butch O'Hare flew 2 of them, and Butch Vorse, my grandfather, flew 1. And at the time, Butch Vorse was not Butch Vorse. That wasn't his call sign. He was Roy Vorse. But on that last mission, Butch O'Hare actually was shot down in the confusion of night. It's believed he was shot down due to friendly fire. And so after that, Butch was actually, my grandfather, Roy Vorse, was given the call sign Butch due to his close relationship and friendship with Butch O'Hare. So, and then he flew some pretty famous missions. So there's a mission called the Mission into Darkness. This was towards the end of the war, and the United States was gaining a lot of momentum in the war, and they had figured out where the Japanese fleet was. So as part of a sneak attack, the Navy launched all their military assets at night, all their airplanes, to go attack the Japanese fleet, knowing that the Japanese fleet was so far away that many of the pilots would not be able to get back to deck without running out of fuel, so they'd have to ditch their planes in the water and potentially never get picked up, and having to land on an aircraft carrier at night, which back in 1944 was not really an option. But Butch and several other aviators went and took off and completed that mission, and like I said, many didn't make it back to the deck, and Butch was lucky to land aboard the Hornet at night, and it was not a pretty night, but it was a pivotal moment in his career as well. So Butch saw a lot of action in World War II and was lucky to be alive when it was all said and done, given some of his engagements, and he received a Purple Heart for that shoot down in Guadalcanal. You know, Butch's flight training started out in Alameda, California, basic flight training, but Corpus Christi has a naval air base there where they did a lot of training for naval pilots. Pensacola is also a hub for training as well, but Butch found his way in Corpus Christi. So that's where he learned to fly a dive bomber and was assigned to his initial dive bomber squadron. Butch was actually in Corpus Christi when Pearl Harbor happened. So he was actually in a movie called Dive Bomber that was just brand new at that time. He came out of the movie theater, and the news had just broken that Pearl Harbor had just been attacked. And literally the next day, Butch was out over the Gulf of Mexico, defending the Gulf of Mexico in his dive bomber before he was then deployed out to the Pacific Fleet in San Diego, where he would transfer to a fighting squadron. Butch was in Corpus Christi for about 6 months, but he did transfer out to San Diego in the Pacific Fleet pretty quickly, and where he spent another 4 months before he was eventually deployed out onto an aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, and that's where he saw his initial combat over Guadalcanal. Well, interesting, so Butch had another interaction with Texas. So the Blue Angels actually ended up being based in Corpus Christi when Butch came back to the Blue Angels for the second time. So the Blue Angels were actually disbanded and reorganized. The Blue Angels were actually reorganized in 1950 to a fighter squadron when the Korean War broke out. So they reorganized into what's then called VF-191 Satan's Kittens, and they were deployed out to the Korean War. You know, you've asked me about getting access to the Blue Angels as a result of being Butch Vorse's grandson. When I first moved to Texas, one of the first things I did was attend an air show at Ellington Field in Houston, Texas. And I bought a ticket like anyone else and just wanted to bring my camera there and get some good shots of the Blue Angels flying. Well, I'd mentioned to a mutual friend named Owen Hewitt, who's an air show photographer, that I was at the air show, and he had relationships with the Blue Angels, so he had texted the lead solo at the time, a guy named Tyler Davies, and said, "Hey, did you know Butch Vorse's grandson is in the stands today?" Well, 10 minutes later, I get a text message from Tyler Davies, and he goes, "Hey Ryan, this is Tyler Davies. Not sure if you'd like, but if you want, you can come meet the team." Like, who's going to say no to that? So I'm like, yeah, of course I'd love to meet the team. So it gives me some coordinates on my phone. I follow them, and it takes me to a hangar, and there he is, waiting outside the hangar for me. And he goes, "Oh, Ryan, come with me. Come inside the hangar here. I want you to meet a couple people." So I walk into this conference room, and I'm not kidding you, I hear this whoosh. It is the sound of 30 Blue Angels, pilots and crew and khaki newbies, all standing up at attention. And they're not standing at attention because I'm Ryan Notoff of Blue Angel Phantoms. They're standing at attention because I'm Butch Vorse's grandson. And I mean, I got goosebumps. And I don't know what you do in that situation, but they said, well, go around, introduce yourself to everyone. So I go down, there's a conference table in the middle of the room. I started shaking the pilot's hands one by one. I get down to like the fourth pilot. There's 30 people in the room, so it was really awkward. And I'm like, this is going to take like 20 minutes. So, you know, I just waved to everyone else and all the khaki newbies, which are the pilots, which are people that have been selected to be pilots in the next year were there. So James Haley was in the room that day. Jim Cox was in the room that day, and they're on the current team right now. So waved all of them, and then they brought me to the front of the room, and they said, well, do you have anything to say? And obviously I didn't really have prepared remarks, but it was an amazing opportunity to talk about my grandfather. And I happened to be wearing, I don't wear graphic t-shirts ever. I wore my Harley Hall t-shirt to the air show that day. And what an honor to be able to talk about how Harley Hall is also my hero in addition to Butch Boris, and have that team hear that and listen and really receive that message. So that was a really special occasion where I got to meet the Blue Angels as a result of being Butch Boris's grandson. And then the next year, and then obviously since built relationships with the current team to a bit where I let them know I was in Corpus Christi, and they invited me to their brief before the Corpus Christi air show, and you know, again, got goosebumps watching the team go through the briefing process. Well, after that, they asked Adam Carrick, who's the number 8 pilot, to drive me back to the stands before the air show starts. Well, Chewy, who was the narrator at the time, and Adam Carrick drive to the air show site where they're going to narrate. They forgot I was in the back of the car. So I'm sitting with them as they're watching the acts before the air show, and you know, I think I spoke up at some point, and they go, oh, we forgot to drop you off. Well, they're like, no problem. When the air show starts, just stand behind number 8, Adam Carrick, and you can watch the air show from the narration. So another real special opportunity that I got to experience as a result of being Butch Boris's grandson.
We feel, all of us, and I speak for all of the pilots on the team, and really every pilot, officer, or enlisted on the whole team. As we have approached our 75th anniversary this year of the existence of the Blue Angels, you know, the Blue Angels were founded back in 1946 by then Admiral Nimitz. You know, I look back over my shoulder to the poster showcasing our original boss, and actually signed by the very first boss of the Blue Angels, Butch Boris. And it's humbling. It's you feel almost not worthy, I guess, sometimes, in some days for sure, of wearing this blue flight suit and of being here in this seat, being the number 2 pilot. You know, we often, you know, the term is, you know, oh, you know, you've got big shoes to fill. And when you think about filling, you know, the one person that you're replacing, that feels like big shoes. But when I think about all of the 2s, and occasionally, you know, I'll send them out an email, and still, you know, I got to go meet and play a round of golf with one of the 2s from back in the 1960s, flying F4s, Vince Danilli. And when I think about that and how, you know, guys and people did it before I was even born, is incredibly impressive and humbling to have the unique opportunity to be a number 2 pilot and flying in the 2021 season. And again, we've got to meet actually Butch Boris's grandson, and I've had some phenomenal conversations with him, and it's just super cool that the community that we are able to kind of all keep up, and we get a lot of great tips from everybody, all the alumni from the Blue Angels. And again, just feel incredibly humbled and fortunate to get to be a small part of this thing that's so much bigger than myself. I was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas, actually, and I was 6 months old when my parents finally got back to Texas. It's funny, actually, all of my siblings, I have 3 siblings, and they were all born in Texas. My parents were both born in Texas, so I'm kind of the odd person in the family, odd one out, and they never let me live it down. And I also tell my mom that I really wish she would have just gone back to Texas to have me, so that I could be a part and really claim, you know, that I was born there. But however, I you know, follow the mantra. I wasn't born there, but I literally got there as fast as I could, being 6 months old. And I grew up on a cattle ranch in the northeastern corner of the Texas Panhandle, a small town called Canadian, Texas. It's about 100 miles northeast of Amarillo. Our nearest Walmart is an hour away in Pampa, and nearest mall or airport that you can fly in and out of is Amarillo. So we're way up in West Texas, but then I tell other people, you know, northeast corner of the Panhandle that are any bit familiar. So yeah, and so I grew up helping my parents and my dad on the ranch every day, working after school and on the weekends and all summer long, just learning to ride, rope, drive a tractor. Kind of got to the unique opportunity to do all of that. And at the time growing up, I definitely took it for granted. I thought it was just kind of work. And but now looking back, it was such a unique and fortunate childhood opportunity that I am grateful for to this day. And I hope that, you know, maybe my own children would be able to, one day we can get back to Texas as soon as possible and raise my children kind of in the same hometown or the same experience or like experience that we can. Because I think it instills a lot of good values and just overall character building aspects to a childhood that I, again, like I said, I'm very grateful for. Additionally, I can't say enough great things about Canadian, Texas and all the mentorship that I had there. It's a tiny little town, only 2,000 people, and where everybody knows everybody waves at everybody going down the highway and down the streets. So that's the exact environment that I'd love to raise my children into, just because it's, you know, it's full of good Texas people. And I think it's super cool that, you know, people that grew up in Texas, we understand each other, and it's a very friendly and just down to earth place to grow up. And, you know, hopefully that we all can raise our children as well in that kind of same environment. So when I was 8 years old, my grandparents, they lived in Midland, Texas, and there was a big air show going on down there. I was going down to see them and for the summer, and they said, hey, you know, we'd love to take you to this air show. And up until that point, I mean, I don't think I'd ever really been on an airplane. We had a local town, you know, hometown friend that had owned a little Cessna, and he had taken me up, I think up to this point. I can't remember if it was just afterwards or prior to this, but long story short, I went to this air show and saw all these old, you know, World War II era aircraft from the commemorative Air Force flying. And I don't tell a lot of people this, but the Thunderbirds were actually there. So I got to see the Thunderbirds perform. And from that moment, I, you know, said, I want to be a pilot. And I started telling my parents that. I told everybody that, you know, my teachers, my coaches, etc. I was like, this is the life for me. I don't know anything about flying, but I'm certain that I want to be a pilot, because just the freedom with which aircraft, you know, from the P-51 to an F-16 takes the air, and the gracefulness with which, you know, those aircraft can perform. Super cool. So I was initially dead set on going to the Air Force Academy, and thinking that, you know, I need to, you know, how do I set myself up to get in there? I had a couple family friends and, you know, local people that had gone to New Mexico Military Institute. It's a 4-year high school and 2-year junior college out in Roswell, New Mexico. And I knew it was a prep school for a lot of the service academies. And there was another hometown person that had gone to that school and had also pursued a career in the military. So from all that, I was like, hey, I need to go somewhere where, you know, they look to military, where the service academies look to getting someone placed, I guess. And so I went there, had a wonderful guidance counselor who said, hey, the Air Force, that's great, but to expand your options, maybe you should apply to the Naval Academy as well, just to cover more bases, and West Point as well, if you want to, if military service is your goal. And I said, I really want to fly jets of some sort. She said, well, the Navy has awesome jet opportunities as well. And I applied to the summer seminar program at the Naval Academy, went up there, and of course they give you the full array of what the Navy does and all the different mission sets, and how you could be anything from a Navy SEAL to drive a sub, a ship. You could be a Marine officer, or you can fly Navy jets. And that kind of different options, and just, I don't know if you've ever been to Annapolis, but I loved the town. Is beautiful up there, and I fell in love. So I kind of switched my whole game plan to go to the Naval Academy instead of the Air Force Academy. I applied to Texas A&M and the University of Texas as well, and I actually really got close to, instead of going to the Naval Academy, choosing to go to Texas A&M or UT, but ended up going to the Naval Academy, didn't look back, and all those stepping stones, set me to be in this seat today here talking to you. So I am eternally grateful to all the mentorship along the way, and all the people that really helped me achieve this childhood dream of, when I was going to an air show when I was 8 years old. Being a Texan can be seen as a more intense version of American patriotism, and what is really cool is having the opportunity in the Navy to travel all around the world and move every few years to a bunch of different states and meet just people from all walks of lives in all different 50 states. And I would 100% agree that patriotism in the U.S. Armed Forces is downright inspiring. What I liken the Texas esprit de corps, if you will, or I think it's one of the, being a Texan is kind of one of the largest senses of community out there. Like, that when you meet a Texan on the street, or a fellow service member who's a Texan, that Texan has, if they grew up in Texas, they've had 7th grade Texas history, and they know all about the Alamo, and you can talk to them for hours. And on top of that, they probably want to talk for hours, because all Texans are super friendly and just a great people to hang out with and talk about life. So I've had that experience countless times throughout my military service, and it's absolutely inspiring to represent the 800,000 men and women across the Navy and Marine Corps. But there's like a little piece of me that's also just proud to be able to represent Texas and everything that I kind of in my service thus far. There's not exactly a base in a naval base in Texas that has any kind of special mission, I would say, but Corpus Christi Naval Air Base, as well as Kingsville. So I actually went through NAS Kingsville in my training, and it's one of 2 of the advanced jet training bases, where if you track that you're going to go be a fighter pilot, that you'll either go to NAS Kingsville or Meridian, Mississippi. And what's unique about, I think, the experience to fly in South Texas, you get to experience a lot of the weather patterns that Texas is famous for, and I think you get a lot of great experience as a pilot flying down there. And I'm, again, super fortunate and humbled by my ability to, or my background in having to get to have flown there. There's no specific special missions, I think, that you were talking about, at least with the Navy perspective. with respect to Texas bases, at least that I'm aware of currently. But I tell you what, to have 50% of all naval carrier aviators trained in Texas is kind of a cool stat, and it's cool that to have had that experience and to have been able to fly down there. 50% of all carrier naval aviators, so any kind of person that would fly and land an aircraft on an aircraft carrier is currently, and for the last so many years, has been trained in Texas at NAS Kingsville, because the only other base that trains that is NAS Meridian in Mississippi. So those are, for the Navy, there's only 2. I know the Air Force has a lot of different ones, but for the Navy, there's only 2. So chances are half of all naval aviators landing on carriers right now have been trained at NAS Kingsville.
Christie is basically an equivalent of Shepherd Air Force Base for the Air Force guys when they're going through primary flight training. We have some sort of differences. They have a few different stages than we do. However, they can also go through a place called Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma for their primary, and we'll actually send an exchange pilot from either the Navy or Marine Corps to go through that base along with the Air Force. The Air Force can also send guys down to Corpus Christi, Texas, to train with us as to keep up that unilateral or bilateral exchange program. Shepherd is, I think, the next phase for them after that. So it'd be closer to an in-between stage of Corpus and Kingsville for the Marine Corps. So a little about me and my background. Before the Blue Angels, I grew up in Kingwood, Texas, and went to Kingwood High School. It's a suburb just on the northeast side of Houston, there in Texas. I played sports. I did football and swimming and lacrosse. I also was in the band. I did some military marching things. I tried to be as well-rounded as I possibly could, including earning my Eagle Scout when I was 18 years old. From there, I went to Texas A&M University, where I majored in psychology. Got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology of all degrees, and then used that to ultimately join the Marine Corps. So I went out, looked at a bunch of different services, different branches of the military, and both of my cousins were current active duty Cobra pilots for the Marine Corps. And in very polite words, they said, if you join any other branch besides the Marine Corps, we're going to disown you from the family. So it made my decision quite easy. And next thing you know, I signed a air contract for the Marine Corps and went off to the basic school up in Quantico, Virginia. Texas really helped shape me and mold me into to have the motivation to join the military. Coming from a family who's all Texans, 100% Texans, military background was very important to us. And at least one member from each family has kind of represented their side in the military for the past, 50 years or so from our side. After the basic school in the Marine Corps, I then started flying the Aviate-B Harrier down in Cherry Point, North Carolina. I then picked up a conversion package to go fly the F-35B Stovall variant of the F-35 Lightning II. And then from there, I got selected to then fly the F-18 Hornet for the Blue Angels this past year. I spent some time in Corpus Christi and Kingsville, Texas, down in the south towards the border on the Rio Grande for our primary flight training. After we get out of the basic school as Marines and then ultimately beginning naval aviation part of our career, all Navy and Marine Corps pilots will train together. We start in Pensacola, Florida at a place called Aviation Pre-Flight Indoctrination, API is what we refer to it as, where we learn the basics of weather and aerodynamics and how aircraft interact with each other in the sky with air traffic control and instrument flight procedures. From that school, we then kind of sparse out to around the country, and I chose to go down to Corpus Christi, Texas, where I learned to fly the T-34 Turbo Mentor. The plane is no longer there. We actually upgraded to the T-6 Texan, but I loved my time in the T-34 in Corpus. After primary flight training in Corpus, I jumped right across the little bay there to Kingsville, Texas, where I flew the T-45 Charlie. It's called the Goshawk. It's a single jet trainer that is going to help prepare you to fly jet engine aircraft in your fleet aircraft. After Kingsville is when we ultimately get selected for our fleet platform. That is where I picked up the Harrier, which is also a V-STOL capable aircraft, and proceeded from there onto my fleet career.
scheduled for a mission that actually goes out over the Gulf of Mexico. And initially my thoughts were, oh man, you know, as I'm flying out over the Gulf into a training area that's out there off the coast. And I remember kind of keep glancing back and looking at the land disappearing over my right shoulder. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, we're a little ways from water, or a little ways from land. I don't think I could swim this far anymore. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, I sure hope I chose the right profession. I mean, got a long ways from land. So that memory just kind of sits with me, and it was my very first just experience flying out, feet wet, over the water. You know, land disappeared. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico is a great resource for, you know, training jets down there, and to be able to, especially for Navy pilots, get that experience, right? You know, fly out away from land where all you have is water underneath you. There is vast amounts of air above all that water where we can do all of our training, which is a very valuable resource. And it's I think it kind of, again, the start of where you learn to be a naval aviator. And since then, you can rest assured I've done a lot of feet wet flying, as they call it in the Navy, and been well away from land, and where actually the only place you could come back and land was the aircraft carrier. So those fears kind of fade, or at least hopefully they do, and you get to experience all of that as flying both in Kingsville and then on your trip as a naval aviator through your career, I should say. What does the two pilot do? So the two pilot is again, I've already said, the right wingman, and we turn over 50% of the pilots every year. So everybody is rotating at least in the number 1 through 6 Delta every year. So boss, or the number 1 pilot, he's here for 2 years. I'm here for 2 years. And then 3 rotates to 4. I kind of think I said that already. 6 rotates to 5. Well, what that does is, you know, we basically train our replacements. And we train our replacements, and then also the 3 experienced people on the team will train the other 3 new people on the team. So 2's job is training a new boss. So we're on opposite schedules, if you will. And so this is actually my 3rd year on the team. We were frozen this past year due to COVID, and then due to the transition to the Super Hornet. So kind of a non-standard aspect to getting to spend 3 years on the team. But my whole job over this past year was to train up our boss. And not that I can ever fly the boss spot, because that's not my job. My job is being able to fly the right wing spot and just know that, that wasn't quite right. You know, because it's so much of it's based on feel and how we go exactly on cadences. And when boss tells us to do something, we do it together in unison, vice kind of watching to see movement and then go, because obviously that would cause kind of a ripple effect, especially when you're kind of flying all together in a line or something like that. So there's an innate trust that you have to develop on this team, and it's such a rewarding experience when you go from your very first flight on the team. You'll never forget it. You know, your very first flight as Blue Angel in this uniform, and flying an aircraft that you thought you knew how to fly really well close to the ground, and taking it kind of to that next level. And then to your last, you know, flight on this team, where you're flying a flight demonstration down at our, you know, lowest altitudes to the ground, at our closest and tightest sets, doing loops, doing rolls, doing a lot of dynamic maneuvering. You kind of get to take a step back and realize how far you've come. And as we say here in the Blue Angels, I'm just glad to be here.